Hey, Trevor Matthews here. Welcome to another morning coffee with Trevor. Your host, Trevor Matthews, and thank you once again for taking the time to hang out with me and get a conversation going. And today is a beautiful morning here in Brantford, Ontario. The balmy minus 20 Celsius. So it's really refreshing when you walk outside and you can breathe that fresh air in. So it's all right. It's good. It's enjoyable. You get used to it, and you always enjoy when that summer weather comes. Over the last week, we've talked about lots of many topics. I've had a great week. I've been talking to many service managers, operation managers looking for refrigeration training and want to invest in their company, into their technician, into their brand, which is really promising for the industry, promising for technician, promising for me to really help share my knowledge, share the experience I have to really help develop more technicians out there, more companies out there, and bring value to the industry. I feel like if I can share my knowledge, share the stuff and experience I have, and really help these businesses grow, help the technicians grow. And that's really what I want to do. I really want to help the industry by training, educating, and developing refrigeration professionals. And that's what Refrigeration Mentor is all about. In 2022, I've also launched a few more programs as well. A 6-week program, 4-week program, 1-day program, and also some individual workshops for both contractors as well as individuals. So I'm excited about this, really trying to get the Refrigeration Mentor brand out there a bit more so people know that there is training that is out there that can really help them. Today, we're going to get into a few different topics, but the main one I'm going to talk about is refrigerant retrofits. This is something that's been coming up more and more. I've been doing a couple trainings last few weeks where people are asking like, Trevor, I need my team to understand retrofits a bit more. What's going on? There's conflicting information out there from different manufacturers of the equipment to compressor manufacturers to valve manufacturers, and we need some help, some guidance on that. And one of the big things is that you need to do some research because you're going to see different manufacturers say a little bit different things. And you need to read these specific guides when you're doing a refrigerant retrofit. Because I've seen lots of retrofit done over the last few years. Because here in Canada, there's refrigerant regulations. And this is happening globally with the F-gas regulations. You get the CARB in the US and you get the Canadian regulations. So there's refrigerant regulations happening everywhere. And this is what is changing the industry. Back in 1987, you had the Montreal Protocol because you had the R12, 502, which were ozone depleting refrigerants. So in 87, they came up with regulations and rules where you can't use that stuff. So they started phasing down and phasing out those refrigerants. Back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, F-gas regulations started to be more stringent, coming up with taxes and things like that. But really, when I started learning more about it, it was back in 2014 when I did work with Emerson. They started talking about these new regulations coming up. And in Canada, back in 2017, I think, well, I guess globally, they came out with the Kigali Amendment. And Kigali Amendment is really amendment to the Montreal Protocol saying that refrigerants with a high global warming potential, so this is now more for the climate, when the high global warming potential, we're going to start phasing down and phasing out these refrigerants because it's bad for the climate and the world. So now you're going to see kind of like a global alliance. That's what they're trying to do for all the countries around the world. Will have different stage approach to reducing refrigerants with high global warming, like 404 and 507. And you can even see the chemical manufacturers reducing production or stopping production of certain refrigerants and transitioning. So over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've seen so many new refrigerants come out there. And what you need to really understand is that these different refrigerants act differently. They have different capacities. They have different glide. And if you don't know what glide is, you really need to understand and take a look at what that means and what that does to a system. Because when you have high glide refrigerant, it acts on those coils, like the condenser and the evaporator, differently than you have a standard single blend refrigerant like R22. And really the best way to talk about a glide refrigerant for me is like right when it leaves the TX valve into the evaporator, it's going to be a temperature, and it's going to be a lower temperature than when it leaves the evaporator. So with a single blend refrigerant, for example, it could be -20 right when it enters the evaporator. When it leaves the evaporator, it's still -20. Well, a blend refrigerant now, it could be, -20 when it enters the evaporator, but now it's -8 when it leaves the evaporator. So that's a massive temperature difference across that coil. So it's these pressures, different refrigerants boiling off at different temperatures. So you really need to understand that. And so when you get into a retrofit application, you need to understand the capacity of all the components, the TX valves, the liquid line solenoids, even the compressors, because the capacities are different. And sometimes you'll gain capacity, you'll lose capacity depending on the refrigerant. You're still going to get the same displacement because those compressors will displace that a certain amount, but the capacities can change. So what you really need to do is get into the compressor guides, retrofit guides. Bitzer has an awesome one. It's called the Refrigerant Report. The last one I seen was from 2021, so last year. And it's so detailed about all the different refrigerants that are out there that it can be in their compressors. For Copeland, it's 9311. It's if you look it up, Copeland 93-11, and it'll tell you what refrigerants are allowed or approved in their compressors. And it's important to understand that because I've seen it over the years where manufacturers of the equipment themselves say, okay, you can use this refrigerant in our equipment, say it's the package unit, air handler, whatever it is. But the chemical manufacturer doesn't approve that refrigerant for that specific application. So you need to really check that stuff and dive into it, because you could run into issues. And the big one is like when you're retrofitting, it could be leaks issues, or it could be an oil issue, right? All of a sudden you do a refrigerant retrofit, and then 3 weeks later the compressor fails because it seizes up because of an oil issue. Anybody do any refrigerant retrofits that's on this morning? And welcome, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Trevor.
Victor, good morning, brother. How you doing?
Fine. How are you today?
I'm good. You're plus 30 on -20 outside.
Yeah,
So
well, a big light.
yeah, a big glide. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. A big glide. I like it.
We did, like I told you last time, and we did a retrofit, but we changed the compressor rack because point number one, if we change with the compressors that we lose the capacity we needed for it. So that's why we choose to change the rack and leave the equipment, and to lower the cost. But at that point, all the system had to be checked, redo, superheat recheck, to
yeah, it's a big job, and you really need to have to plan and prepare when you're doing this. And that's where I've seen contractors get caught before, where they didn't plan and prepare. Oh, well, we can do this job, or we'll pull out the gas and just throw new gas in. Well, that's not the case. You cannot do that. It's not like just a drop-in replacement. I've heard that many times over the years. Oh, it's a drop-in replacement. We can just drop it in and it's good to go. I've seen and heard of so many horror stories of that happening, because it doesn't matter what refrigerant you drop in, you still need to go and check the metering device, and if you have to readjust that, that's just not a drop in. A drop in for me is that you pull out the gas and you put it in, you don't do anything else.
No, that's right.
Right. But that's not the case out there. And I've heard like I said, too many issues in the field. Like the big one is going from from like R22 to 448, 449. There's so many times where contractors did, go check the soup read and do all these checks, but didn't check for leakage and didn't check and change the gaskets on certain components where, you're pulling a new evacuation on, say, the system, and the elastomers inside those gaskets or the rubbers, they start to leak and they fail and degrade. And these are things you need to think of.
Yeah.
It's so important, because if you don't, and then you do this great job for your customer, but now you have a leak of 250 pounds of gas, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Yes. Right now at 448 and 449 is what, $300 a cylinder.
Wow. Yeah. So, and the price is going to be different wherever you're at, but still, it's a lot of money. And then you're leaking to the environment. Here in Canada, you have to fill out forms, you have to report it, and all that stuff by the regulations.
Yes, like the F-gas, you have to report it. And everything goes on your account, and you don't want that to be on your account. So
yeah, and it's you got to do it right. You know what I mean? If you do have a leak, you got to fill that stuff out. That's part of our job, that our role. It doesn't mean it's your fault that the leak happened. It could be a rub through or whatever, but you need to be logging the stuff, and you need to be fixing the problem, because these retrofits are, like I said, there's too many contractors I've seen get in trouble or get into situations where they don't do those checks, like valves not being the right size or solenoids not being the right size to handle this new refrigerant. And these are things that I didn't know, but another great guide for retrofits is the Sporelin retrofit guide, because they talk about the specific valves they make. So they talk about the TEVs, they talk about the solenoids, they talk about the EPRs and things to look for. Because when you're going from 404 to 448, there's a lot of checks that you need to do. And there's on the very last page, there's a very good chart where it says, mandatory check or replacement, highly recommended replacing. And that's something that you need to look into, because for example, if the solenoid is a size, liquid line solenoid, for example, is size tight, like for capacity, and for 404 and you go to 448, you might not have the maximum operating pressure differential to open that valve. And that's something I wouldn't even think of, you know what I mean? Okay, I thought of, changing the gasket, or checking the gasket and checking for leaks, but that's where you need to plan and prepare for when you're doing a retrofit. Yeah, it's important to do that stuff for sure. One thing that you also need to do before you get started, before you're doing the gas retrofit, is weeks before, you need to go around and check all those valves, find out where they're all at, and build yourself a map. Because there's a lot of times when I went into stores after 10 or 15-year-old stores that the map has changed. There's new cases that no one put on the original legend. And you need to do that, because if you're servicing that store all the time, so you got to go around, find all the different valves, the type of valves, the EPRs. You need to find leaks if there's any leaks, and mark them all off. So the night of the retrofit, you can fix any leaks that you found or seen, or potential leaks. So when that retrofit night comes, you'll have the oil. If you need to do an oil change, always be doing oil samples. I don't think this is done enough. Like, you need to be checking that oil contamination in the system. Really fails a lot of compressors out there. That's something you need to check. And you need to go through this stuff thoroughly. Have a checklist when you're doing a retrofit. And it doesn't matter if it's on a rack or if it's on a package unit, you need to go through a checklist and have a checklist. So, Copeland will have them, Bitzer will have them, Sporelin will have these checklists, all the large manufacturers. So any of the equipment manufacturers, they usually have a checklist, and you need to go through them to make sure that when you're doing the retrofit, that you're prepared to do it. And even before you get to that point, you really need to prepare on when you're pricing this to the customer, so they understand that you may need to do a couple oil changes. Because if you're going from R22 to, say, 407C, you might have to do a couple oil changes. Usually you don't. If you do your filter change, you pull out the compressor, most of that oil's in the compressor. For example, a scroll compressor or even a semi-hermetic should be 95% of that oil in the system, from the system in there, or 90% of the oil should be in that compressor. So you can get away with maybe just one oil change, but that's something you need to check and you need to verify, because if you don't, and you don't have the right oil percentage going from mineral oil to POE oil, you can run into logging issues. You're not getting oil back, and then you get a failed compressor. But then you put a new compressor in now with new POE oil. Now you get the right percentage, and then you get away with it. But then you don't understand, especially if you don't look inside the compressor, what caused that failure. And this happens time and time again out there. A lot of what I've seen over the years, field support for a manufacturer is that there'd be an issue in the system. I can't figure out, they blame components. It could be compressor, it could be valves. They blame the components. They pull out a component that could be failed or not failed, and then they put in, they reinstall it, fix any problem that may be there. It could have been a leak, it could have been set up. And then when they put that new in, now it's back and running, and they're like, oh, okay, it was that was the problem. It was the compressor that was the problem. But really, that wasn't the problem. Really could have been short on gas and they didn't notice, or it's a interlaced coil. I've seen this many times with electronic valves, interlaced coils with two valves. One of the systems was short on gas and it affected the other coil while it was running. So then you'd have a valve hunting like this, because you have these interlaced coils, and one of the coils were not having any refrigerant in it. And so they would replace the valve, put a new one in, charge it back up properly, and then it would work fine. And they would blame the component, but really it wasn't the component, it was the system that was low on charge. And then they fixed that problem without even knowing that of the real problem. So these are the things, little things that you need to check and look at. And so when you're doing a retrofit, especially a gas retrofit, you need to understand this stuff. There's other refrigerants. Oh, Joel, how you doing, brother?
Hey, Trevor, morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, man. Good morning. Good morning. I haven't done any gas retrofits, but it sounds very exciting. I listened to, I think it was advanced refrigeration, and how sometimes they go about a gas retrofit. There's a lot of factors, as you are saying, that you have to put into place. You have to put in perspective. Certain gaskets and certain components you have to actually change when you're doing a retrofit. So it's quite interesting. It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of it all comes down to your site visit. Revisiting the customer, ensuring, mapping out what it is that you need to do. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting, I must say.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things. I've listened to Kevin and Brett's podcast too. And like Kevin says, it's all about the planning, right? And it's taking the time to understand that. And that's even before you quote it, because you need to understand, because it can cost a lot of money. Oil is so expensive right now, POE oil. So you need to factor in that if you need to do 2 oil changes, that you should factor that in. And you want to, you still want to get jobs, right? You don't want to price yourself out, but you need to be honest with yourself and your customer of what it's going to cost. And if they go out with a cheaper solution and then they run into issues, then at least you don't have to deal with those issues. Because when you start to either cut corners or try to save costs, that's when you start to run into issues, and then it costs you a lot more money in the long run. Some of the good contractors that I've worked with and dealt with before that do retrofits, they are very detailed in the retrofit plan. They write up a whole guide. They write this whole plan up and show it to the customers. This is what we're going to do, to provide you this retrofit, because it's not just like a lot of people, oh, well, what we're going to do, we're going to pull out gas, we're going to throw no gas in, and then you're going to be good to go. That is inexperienced contractors not knowing and not doing a lot of retrofits, especially with these new gases. And so the other few gases that you'll see is going from 134A to R450, which is a Honeywell refrigerant, or R513, which is a Chemours refrigerant. Now, these refrigerants, the chemicals, the way they are designed, they do not carry oil the same way as the 134A. So there are limitations, and you'll see right now, and maybe they have updated it, but the last time I checked, Copeland doesn't have any approved low temp R513 compressor. Medium temp and high temp they have approved, but not low temp yet. And even in the medium temp guide, when you look at the retrofit guide, is that there's limitations on that superheat going back to the compressor. So you need to have a minimum of 20 degrees or 10, 11 K back to that compressor. Because if you don't, you're going to, the miscibility is not the same with that refrigerant in the oil, and then you start to get bearing wear. So these are the things that you really need to understand with these new refrigerants, the chemical compounds and the way they mix, or the miscibility of them with the oil. And it takes a long time to learn this because things are changing so fast, especially with refrigerants and these regulations, the F-gas and carb, and all the regulations in the industry. And you're going to see more and more of this change over time. Like right in the guide, the Bitzer guide, you can see R22 and then alternatives. You got 407A, 407C, 407F, 407H, 410A, 417A, 417B, 422D, 427A, 438A. That's a lot of refrigerants. That's just a potential alternatives for R22. There's a ton more refrigerants out there, and it's wild. And so this is something you need to plan with your customer. So if you work with a customer too, and you're buying new equipment or you're doing a retrofit, you need to plan the type of gas that you're going to retrofit to, so that you don't have 40 different gases on that site. So I've seen and heard of that too. Like this system has one type of gas, that system has another type of gas, that system has another type of gas. That is just very confusing and very hard for both the technician as well as the customer. So really understanding that and planning when you're doing a larger retrofit with multiple units on with a customer. Oh, this is fantastic. Okay, so you're going to see situations where when you're doing a retrofit that things don't always work the way they should, right? And we talked about a little bit capacity. So if you're doing a retrofit, and one of the checks you need to do is find out if that compressor is going to deliver that same amount of capacity. Kind of like Victor said, they decide to retrofit a whole rack because they're not going to get the proper capacity as well as efficiency. This is one thing though is common. If you replace an older compressor, even though it's still running, say after 10 years, a newer compressor is going to be more efficient. Because over time, if you had some overheat, you had some flood back, you had higher compression ratios at times, there's work done. And the compressors worked in for that's so long. So you'll see a newer compressor is going to be more efficient. And it doesn't matter really what compressor manufacturer it is. It could be the exact same cross-reference, same model number, but that newer compressor is probably it's going to be more efficient. I've seen lots of studies on this. So just going from an older 10, 15-year-old compressor to a newer one, you're going to gain some efficiency. But you really do need to check that capacity. So you got to go into software. So you go into product selection software, you go into Copeland Mobile, that's for Copeland. You'll go into the Bitzer web software and go in and check for that refrigerant. So you go from R22 to 448, 449, 134A to 513. Those ones aren't a bigger capacity change. I think the bigger ones is probably 404 to 448, 449 when you're doing those retrofits. But it's important just to check that so you understand the difference in capacity. Because will you have enough capacity? Are you losing too much capacity? Are you gaining too much capacity? And these are the things that you need to check and verify. Any questions? I highly recommend getting into these manuals, taking a look at them, because there's so much great information. I will throw them into the description of this video. And there's many more. Like if you go to other manufacturers, you're gonna see that they'll have their own guide and they'll explain it. And I recommend reading multiple ones because you're gonna pick up tips and tricks from each one. That's gonna really help you make your decision on when you're doing a retrofit, you know, a gas retrofit at least, and really prepare for that. It's good. That's good. So Joel, how was your week? What did you get up to today? Still chilling?
No, everything's good.
Good.
Work money, please God. You know,
Awesome. Yep. Excellent.
yeah, everything's
How
good.
about how about you, Victor? How's the R290 systems coming along?
Well, we have a couple of them here in the island.
Yep.
Different supermarket. It's doing good. Efficiency wise, wow.
Yeah, you're seeing a big efficiency
Yeah.
gain.
Yes, and you know, like I told you last time, we have our energy cost is about 32 cents US dollar per kilowatt.
Wow.
And if you lower that, that's more income for the customer. So they really like it, and that's why
Yeah.
we are moving it right now. Like I thought, we are busy right now with one store with 17 cases, 12-foot produce dairy cases. And the dairy cases are closed, and the produce cases are open. Frozen food islands completely closed. Frozen food doors, and it make, like I tell you, a big difference. And
Yeah.
they love it.
Yeah. Well, having the closed islands is, I think, so important. I've seen it so many times where they would just pile product right over the air curtains, you know, and this way is that if there's a, you know, that closing door or window, they can't fill it up too much. They might fill it right up to the window, but at least you have that closed off and you're not losing as much. So it's good to see that, and it's good to see that that is working. I'd love to see some studies on that store, and share that with others, because it's important to see these different technologies and where you can use them and how they can be effective in the different parts of the world, you know, because each part of the world, there's going to be different technology that'll work a little bit better or more efficient. It doesn't mean they can't work anywhere. It just, once again, electricity prices are continually grow in different parts of the world, and it sounds extremely high there. And so you need to come up with solutions for your customers and make sure those solutions that you bring to your customers are the right ones for them. Right at the end of the day, when you're providing that service for their customer or your customer, and you're bringing them that value, they're going to want to come back to you and ask you when they continue to grow or expand. Like they'll want you to be there, be their contractor or be their designer, to really help them grow their business, and trust in you as being their go-to people, and go-to provider by when you bring this value. So the more value you bring to them, it's the more business that they're going to bring to you, and that's just the way it works, right? And that's great to see that is working for your customer. Great to see.
Like you said, Trevor, the product line and in the cases, if they don't take care of it, it will break the carton. So you're gonna lose a lot of money only just to keep that product cool, and it costs you more defrost.
Yeah. 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 And it costs way more money as well now. So if you're using an electric defrost, now you got electric defrost heaters, on top of that. And or hot gas, then you got to run more compressors. You're using more power again. And then you get frozen up cases where now is a service call, which costing them even more money. So you do have to educate your customers doing service. And sometimes they don't listen, but you need to maybe talk to them in a different way. Have a different type of conversation with them to get them to understand.
What I do, I take pictures, send it to the manager, so they know what's happening on the floor.
Yeah, and that's a good idea too, because the people that are stocking those cases, they don't know. You can't blame them. A lot of times they don't know, even though it says fill here. A lot of the times they're younger students, or they don't know about refrigeration. I would have never known that. I would say, let's fill it up as much as possible. You know what I mean? So if they don't know, it's hard to, have an issue with that. So it's up to you to let the manager know, because the manager may not even know, to be honest. It could be a new manager, it could be a different manager from a different department, and they're new in refrigeration. There's lots of different things. So you can't just think that, they're not listening and it's an issue. Maybe they just don't know. So you got to give them the benefit of the doubt and try to help educate them as well. Talk about, if it's a grocery store, talk about how many bags of groceries this is costing them. It's so every time someone buys 2 bags of groceries, if you don't, set this up properly, half of that bag you're not getting paid for. Just change that conversation, because you got to talk in their terms, right? Because they know this person's leaving with 5 bags of groceries. This is kind of the percentage of money I'm making. Or how can you increase their bottom line, right? Because they got to sell a lot of groceries to make money. Like, how do you increase their bottom line? And this is by, okay, well, you don't have to use as many defrosts. You don't have to have people washing the cases out as much.
That's another thing. If they just keep filling, right? And supermarket mostly of the time use a FIFO system, that's a first in, first out. All the products on the bottom never comes to the top. So your product is gonna expire in your cases.
Yeah.
That's another point that they have to look at it.
Yeah. No, and exactly. And I've seen that multiple times, where it's not properly staged. The product's not properly staged. And that's within training and education for their employees, right? So it's something that they'll need to spend time on doing. And that's, as a contractor, maybe you can help them with solutions on doing that. I've seen different systems on, like for dairy, on how, you just roll the stuff in. So all the stuff, they put it in the back, and then it just goes to the forward. So you're not having to pull everything out and put things in the back, for an example, in a dairy cooler. And things like that. Maybe there's different scenarios that you can help them out with, or guide them to, or maybe different solutions when you're doing a retrofit or a new store. Because there's a lot of these case manufacturers coming up with new innovative ideas. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for spending another morning with me, getting a conversation going, and we will see you tomorrow again. Let's get a conversation going, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Trevor.